Does Russia have the capability to fight the West all alone? Right, that's a good question. So we're talking about fighting here. So what does it mean when you say fight? Are we talking about a fist fight? We're talking about a military fight? We're talking about an economic fight? Are we talking about a multi dimensional fight? Uh, are we talking about lawfare, warfare, cyber warfare, whatever warfare? So let's assume it's everything put together. Okay. So, what are Russia's capabilities vis-a-vis the West? First of all, Russia's economy is not even in the top 10, okay, worldwide. Russia is an autarky, which means that it won't be affected by sanctions, and it has not been affected by sanctions. Russia's economy has actually grown stronger over time, the past 2.5 or so years, ever since the February 22 special military operation started. So Russia's economy is overall okay. It is way more immune to external shocks and sanctions compared to other nations, but it is a small economy, not even in the top 10 in the world. So economically, Russia cannot really fight the Americans. Okay, when we're talking about the West, we are talking about the United States. The US dominates the West. The US owns the West. The US runs and operates the West. The Russians cannot fight the West economically. They can withstand sanctions. They can fight a good defensive campaign, economic campaign against the West. They can't fight an offensive economic campaign against the West. They do not have the means to fight an offensive economic campaign against the West. What about cyber warfare? I think the Russians are really good at cyber warfare. So when it comes to cyber warfare, I think they are on even terms, even keel, even they're on par. The West and Russia. When it comes to other forms of warfare, bio warfare, chemical warfare, pretty sure the Russians are really good at that. Okay. What about space warfare? The Russians have interesting satellites that apparently can maneuver on their own and do stuff. So they're reasonably good at that. But probably the Western satellites and capabilities out outmatch those of Russia, especially with the private sector in the US taking off SpaceX and all that. So over that, the West has an advantage. What about conventional warfare? When it comes to conventional military warfare, I think the Russians have a very powerful military, but they do not have the power projection capabilities that the US has. The US has more than 800 extraterritorial military bases worldwide. The Russians don't even have 20, maybe 20 or so. So the Russians are no match when it comes to power projection. Okay, conventional military warfare. Technologically, the Russians are developing all kinds of 21st century weapon systems like drones and loitering munitions and suicide weapons and all that. Suicide robotic loitering drones, all those things. The Russians have good tanks and good soldiers, good infantry, good mechanized divisions, and all of that. But overall, do they have the ability to strike at the heart of Europe if they want to? It's kind of doubtful given the kind of strength NATO has. The Russians have one of the largest air forces in the world. Many of those aircraft could be kind of old aircraft, MiG 31s and Sukhoi 30s and Sukhoi 35s. They have the Sukhoi 57, which is a fifth generation fighter plane and all that. They are in the process of developing various flying wing aircraft like the Okhotnik drone and other things. They have, so all of that is there. They have excellent cruise missiles, the Russians. They have the probably the only nuclear powered, nuclear fueled cruise missile in the world, which essentially has unlimited range, all of that. But overall, militarily, Russia is a very powerful defensive power. It does not have the offensive capabilities that the US and the West have. Okay, so it's a great defensive power, but it cannot. The American Air Force definitely outmatches the Russian Air Force. The American power projection capabilities completely outmatch those of Russia. Russia is essentially surrounded by the US, whether it is in the east. I mean, if you look at the map, you will see that apart from China, Russia, I mean, see, in the east, you have South Korea and Japan, and this, that kind of encircle Russia. You have Taiwan, you have the Philippines, you have all these pro-US nations that kind of encircle China and Russia. In the west, you have Western Europe that kind of, is a barrier against Russia, and NATO has been creeping eastwards. And Russia has some ability to project power in Syria, etc., but not too much compared to what the US has, and then nothing else apart from that. Russia does have a significant amount of influence in Central Asia, but that's about as far as it goes. So Russia is a powerful defensive power. Can Russia defeat the West all alone? It cannot defeat the West in a conventional war. Russia will lose a conventional war. The US simply has too many assets. The US Air Force itself is enough to, take out the Russian Air Force eventually. So where does Russia have the advantage? Russia has the world's largest nuclear weapons stockpile. It can absolutely annihilate the US and the rest of the world if it chooses to. But that will be a nuclear holocaust, which will destroy the whole world. So the Russians obviously don't want to do that. No one wants to do that because it will mean the destruction of the entire planet, including Russia. So that is the last weapon the Russians have. The Americans know that if they push too far, if push comes to shove, something really bad could happen. So overall, if you look at all of this put together, the Russians are a tremendously powerful defensive power, but they don't have the ability to project power and defeat the West on, let's say, Western soil. But they have the ability to destroy the West if they choose to, which will end up destroying the whole world. So that's where Russia is. It cannot be defeated, but it can't win.